A white lady. I never told Kate about what had occurred to me that day on Main Street after 3 weeks. Mom and I relocated, so it's not like I had many opportunities to. We found ourselves in yet another sleepy, historic village populated mostly by long-term residents. There are a lot of such locations, I suppose. This one was named Wheeler, which struck me as being a very dull name for a town. Wheeler had a main street, but it lacked a dollar theater, not a single theater. I hadn't seen my father in exactly 10 months. I believed at first that he was merely preoccupied, but I soon realized that he had no interest in interacting with me. I was upset about it for a long time, but I finally came to understand it when my mother revealed to me years later that he wasn't my biological father when Mom informed me she had been intoxicated, even the day we arrived into our enormous, run-down new rental, which had formerly been as a kind of hospice care facility before being remodeled. She'd started drinking in Wheeler, together with Derek, an odd person she'd chosen to assist us with the move. I had to unload the majority of the U-Haul while Mom drank wine from a glass that kept filling up and mumbled directions about where to set down boxes. Since we had moved to Wheeler, there had been a lot of strange males in the area, however. These kinds of things are beyond the comprehension of a 9-year-old. So for me, life in Wheeler returned to a near normal state. I acquired new acquaintances, began at a new school, and Grandma would even come over for supper on Sunday evenings one evening. She hobbled up our driveway while fumbling with a big container. I ran to assist her out the front door. "What is this?" Reaching to take the container. "A big crate." From her, I asked. She didn't have to respond because Chuck, a 10-week-old Siberian husky, who I instantly fell in love with, was here with a little yip from within the crate. Chuck provided me with distraction, which may be all that's ultimately necessary, even if he wasn't a replacement for a father figure. Chuck was fed, trained, walked, and his feces was cleaned by me. I bathed him, trimmed his nails, and watched for any health issues. I made my own veterinarian visits as needed. He offered me unwavering devotion and the kind of euphoric, star-struck adoration that only a puppy can give in exchange. Chuck had one little issue. He didn't like the home, or he disliked some aspects of the home. At any rate, it eluded me to solve. I can always count on him to stay off the guest bed. He would sound a wary cry in a random spot on the kitchen floor. Furthermore, he refused to enter my mother's bedroom. I first assumed it was simply an odd personality trait. I didn't think it may be anything else at all until one day in the autumn of 2011. Chuck met me at the door with messy kisses as I was getting ready to leave 5th grade school. Chuck strolled along me as I put down my bag, grabbed a glass of chilled water from the refrigerator, and ascended the stairs. Chuck, however, stopped dead in his tracks and began to moan gently as I went down the long upstairs corridor toward my bedroom. "Boy, what's wrong?" I inquired. He only perched on his hind legs and gazed fixedly at the closed door of the guest room, which is next to my bedroom. I shrugged and replied, "Yeah, I know you don't like it in there." Chuck began to growl as I took a few more steps toward my bedroom. He never let forth a roar. With arched eyebrows, I turned to face him again. He seemed more vigilant than I had ever seen. There was a problem. I must have spent a whole minute staring at the door. "Mom?" Eventually, to yell too loudly, I cried out, my voice a little muffled. I had given up trying to find out her schedule, so I had no idea whether she was home. Chuck stepped gingerly near the door of the guest room and then back away. My throat was pounding with my heart. I inhaled deeply before using my clammy hand to unlock the guest room door and peek inside. However, it was nothing like the guest room. Don't get me wrong, the room was the same window, the same notch on the distant wall, and the same ceiling. It was distinct, however. The walls were covered in a horrifying, completely unknown papering of cream and teal stripes. The bed, which had been the guest bed, was rather old-looking, with crisp white sheets and a painted metal frame. An unsettling black stain on the floor next to the bed was the sole item that didn't seem right. This was not at all like what I'd seen outside the sticky shoe over 2 years ago, or like that day in the park all those years ago, however. The sensation was the same. I was seeing something. a recollection, but I wasn't completely engulfed in it, yes. But I could feel something approaching, like a painful sneeze that simply wouldn't go away. Chuck gave me a startlingly loud and biting bark that brought me back to reality. My hands trembled and my chest heaved. I had a look around. Through and through, it was the guest room all over again. Wallpaper in navy blue, the bed my folks used to have. A little brown dresser that my grandmother had given us many years ago. Yes, the visiting room, same as usual. I couldn't help but wonder just now what took place in this instance. There was an answer to that question, and it was more repulsive and disgusting than I could have ever imagined. It would take me an additional 10 months to start learning it. July of 2012, Wheeler had just opened a brand new, state-of-the-art movie theater, but I had been too afraid to visit, which is why I remember the date so well. The country was stunned by a shooting that occurred at a cinema in Colorado. I was starting to reflect more thoroughly on what I had seen. The deaths I'd apparently experienced, though from someone else's perspective. Why had I been given these visions? Why had I been given this bizarre, scary privilege? There had to be a purpose, I decided, and it was my responsibility to find it. Thus, I decided to spend a night on the worn-out, uncomfortable mattress in the guest room next door rather than on my own bed. I lit lights and sang E pluribus unum, the only Latin words I knew, with more drama than I would like to confess. For a moment I thought of shaking some salt into the floor, but I knew it would never come out from between the hardwood's cracks. Nevertheless, having only seen a few horror films, I'd pulled together a fairly decent seance, and I thought it would create a pleasant atmosphere for any spirits who felt like sharing their last moments with me. I spent a very dull night watching at the moonlight reflected against the notch in the wall. So I went to bed dissatisfied and drifted off in the early hours of the morning. I was initially perplexed as to why the window was on the incorrect side of the room when I momentarily woke up before it became light outside. I then realized that I was in the guest room and started to massage my eyes. But my eyes were startled awake when I saw my hand, which was sagging. Wrinkled and covered with liver spots, I tried to sit straight upright, but my efforts just sent a searing ache down my back and I hardly moved. I felt so exhausted, almost lifeless. But in the end, there was simply a resigned, hesitant acceptance, not dread. It was about time to leave the party. It had become stale. My spouse, my parents, and my old friends were already dead. I couldn't be any different. Why, therefore, were my hands perspiring? Why was my poor, failing heart hammering desperately against my ribs? I was scared, terrified even. But of what I did not know, I was just unable to recall. With a creak, the doorknob twisted, the door swung open, and the devil herself emerged. The one who scared me while death did not threaten, the Caucasian lady. She greeted Dorothy, saying hi. A little grin adorned her stunning mouth. Why was she required to be so attractive? If she weren't, it would be simpler in some way. I gently cocked my head to see at what she rolled in behind her. A tray resting on a cart. On the tray were various needles, formulas, and units of serrated, violent-looking surgical equipment. What would she do with them? I could not remember everything, but I remembered the screams of all the others. No, I croaked. No. Please, there, Dorothy, the woman in white crooned. She closed the door behind her and the lock clicked with finality. This will only hurt for a while. I suppose we've reached the part of the story where I tell you about Mrs. Vance. Ms. Vance was my 8th grade history teacher. Most of the students liked her a lot. I never did. And for a long time, it was a complete mystery why she was nice, funny, and cared about her job. Though middle-aged, she was also exceptionally pretty, in a way that sometimes made it hard to focus on what she was saying. We'd spent most of the year in her class talking about the history of our state, but had recently turned toward family history, and ours was a kind of history we could all easily accessible. We were encouraged to talk to our parents and our grandparents, and learn as much as we could about our genealogy. The final project was to present our findings to the class. To demonstrate, Mrs. Vance prepared a presentation about her family history. She began by talking about herself, how she'd grown up in Wheeler, been raised by a single mother and never married. though she did have a son who was grown up and living far away. The slide flipped from a picture of her child to a picture of her father, from modern-day color to an old-timey sepia, unfortunately. I never really knew my dad, she said, and there was clear regret in her voice. He disappeared when I was very, very young. He might have run away. Something might have happened to him. We'll probably never know, but I suppose every family has a few mysteries. She cleared her throat. My mother, Edith, however, the real Miss Vance, as I like to call her, still lives in Wheeler to this day, though she's a very old lady now. The picture on the slideshow changed once more, and I audibly gasped as a woman, movie star beautiful, appeared on the classroom screen, smiling sweetly and dressed in a medical uniform, white of course. A few kids turned to look at me, and I did my best to turn my gasp into a cough. I barely even registered as Miss Vance gushed about her mother, who had been an administrator and hospice nurse at the Halliburton home, a local facility where elderly people would go to live out their final days. I was too numb with shock to notice much of anything besides the photograph, taken in a building that was now my home, of a woman whom I knew to be an Aunt Oliver. I had begun to think of my visions as marks left unwittingly by terrible deaths. I had no idea why I could see them or what I was supposed to do about them, but I knew one thing for certain. Edith Vance was the vilest woman who had ever been born. I had learned to live with a memory, not even mine, of falling from that tree in the park, the smell of gasoline, as it singed someone else's nostrils outside a theater that would one day be known as the Sticky Shoe, but those were nothing compared to what had happened to the poor woman called Dorothy on the night that the woman in white walked into her room. The former, I remembered. The latter I could never forget. It hadn't been an isolated case, either. Dorothy had known to fear her, recalled the screams of the others, even as her mind was fading and she could recall little else. How many others had there been? I sat on this question, and on the identity of the woman in white, for nearly 3 years. I simply didn't know what to do, at least. Not until the day Mom finally at the pantry door unstuck